I've known Elon since 2000. And for the first 20 years, I wouldn't call him a conventionally liberal person, but, I think I would think that it was a little bit more on the, liberal, vaguely libertarian side. Tesla was the flagship company, and it was always the Republicans didn't really believe in climate change, and so it was more naturally. It felt like the Democratic Party was naturally friendlier to Tesla than the Republican Party, and that was roughly where Elon was. And then for a variety of reasons, he really shifted a lot, and then I think I think there are different stories like this for a lot of people, why they shifted that are interesting. So I think my story in a way is not quite as interesting because I've had a lot of these beliefs for a longer period of time. But the thing that's interesting is, why did so many of these other people change?
All right, Peter Thiel, last time we did this was about a year and a half ago, pre-Trump re-election. I would say the world was a little different. The first time we ever sat down was 2018. The world was very different. We started to get to know each other in about 2016. That feels like a different world altogether. So my first question to you is, you used to be the counterculture tech bro. Now everybody has come around to your positions, it seems. But as a guy that likes being in the opposition, just personally, how do you feel about that?
I feel a lot better about it. So no, I don't think there's any virtue in being in the opposition of one for the sake of that or anything like that. So no, it's quite strange how much Silicon Valley has shifted. And of course, in some ways, even the Trump election in 2024 feels almost miraculous on some level. If you look at the total votes, it wasn't that enormous a shift.
Mm-hmm.
But if you believe in demographic determinism, it's an enormous shift because the electorate's different in 2024 from 2016. The Republicans in 2016, one would have said, were old white people, and 8 years later, a lot of them would not be alive, and they would be replaced by a younger, more diverse electorate. And so, the Republicans should never have won another election if you believed in the sort of demographic determinism of identity politics, where you do not vote based on reason or argument, but you vote on sub-rational factors like your gender or your race or your sexual orientation or other things like that. And for Trump and JD Vance to win, there were millions and millions of people who had to change their minds, and that's what I think was so impressive and so hopeful, that somehow there was an argument that was made, it convinced people, it worked, and we have another chance in this country.
What did you see in JD early? Because you were basically his first backer, and I think the first real show that he did, like primetime show online, was my show, and it was because you said to me at lunch one day, you were like, why don't you chat with this guy? And you could see how rough he is in that, and now he's just become perfectly polished, I would say.
Man, I don't want to exaggerate my abilities in these things, but I think I had for a long time, I had a keenly felt sense that there was some need to rethink Republican priorities. We needed to somehow move on from, the rhino republicanism of the Bush years, and even the zombie Reaganism of the 1980s, and there were elements of these things that could be kept, but then you really needed to update it in various ways. And I always found him to be very thoughtful, interested in trying to figure these things out, and then somehow, it all came together.
Were you even surprised the way he is so stepped into this thing? I mean, to me, it started at that debate. Suddenly it was like, oh, he was ready to level up. And now you see it in these speeches he's given all over the world at this point.
Yeah, I don't know what the right euphemism is, but I always thought he had a high ceiling.
Fair enough. Why do you think you were sort of first in? I mean, I know you're a contrarian thinker in general, but when it comes to all of these tech guys that are now part of the administration, many of whom, I mean, Elon and David Sachs, guys that you started PayPal with 20 plus years ago, you were really the outsider on all of these guys.
And maybe I was out of my mind. I had no idea what I was doing in 2016. It was I had this naive idea in 2016. You know, outside of Silicon Valley, it's like, you know, roughly half the people vote for one party, half vote for the other. And so, on some level, I thought supporting Trump for president in 2016 was the least contrarian thing I'd done in my life. So, you know, if you're just doing what half the population's doing, there's nothing.
But in that world, it's a pretty insular world, and you still lived there at the time.
And I thought, even with respect to that world, you know, most of them were in the Democratic Party. They were having these intra-democratic fights, and I wasn't fighting over, you know, was it going to be, you know, Hillary or Bernie Sanders, or, you know, there was. I thought, yeah, you could have intense fights there, and then, you know, on the Republican side was just this different thing, and yet there was some way where it got weaponized, and it was dangerous in ways that were greater than ever before. I mean, you know, obviously there were ways people were very anti-Bush, or there were sort of probably a lot of Republicans who were very deranged about Clinton in different ways, but certainly the way it happened with Trump, you know, was I think quite unprecedented. I think and then of course I was in a, you know, I was not in a sort of executive CEO role at one of these companies where you are in sort of a much higher pressure position. I was maybe a board member.
But you were still on the board at Facebook, right?
I think that is in some ways that is a, you know, it's a much less public role than if you're a senior executive or CEO at one of these companies. And there was, yeah, the felt sense of pressure on these people was extraordinary. You know, it's always a sort of a question. I think to some extent people changed their minds and shifted. You know, I've known, you know, where someone like Elon is, you know, is sort of like, in some ways he's one of a kind. In some ways he's paradigmatic for a lot of these things. I've known Elon since 2000. And for the first 20 years, I wouldn't call him a conventionally liberal person, but, you know, I think I would think that it was a little bit more on the, you know, liberal, vaguely libertarian side. You know, Tesla was the flagship company, and it was always the Republicans didn't really believe in climate change, and so it was more naturally. It felt like the Democratic Party was naturally friendlier to Tesla than the Republican Party, and that was roughly where Elon was. And then for a variety of reasons, you know, he really shifted a lot, and then I think there are different stories like this for a lot of people, why they shifted, that are interesting. So I think my story in a way is not quite as interesting, because I've had a lot of these beliefs for a longer period of time. But the thing that's interesting is, you know, why did so many of these other people change?
So you think it's possible, if you had a leading position at one of these companies, that the pressures would have been different on you, and perhaps
I think they would have been extraordinary. And there was, yeah, there's always sort of a question, you know, why were the big tech companies so liberal, so left wing? And one version was, you always say, well, it's because of the, you know, it's the CEOs, or sort of these woke billionaire types, or communist billionaires, or something weird like that. And then there's, you know, maybe it was the snowflake millennial workforce, sort of this bottom up pressure. But I think the factor that was much bigger than those two was this top-down governmental regulatory pressure. And you know, if you're a big company, there's a lot of surface area. There's a lot of areas where you're in possibly regulated. You're in a regulatory gray zone of sorts. Maybe it's especially true if you're doing some kind of new technology where people don't quite know what should be done with it. And so there was an incredible amount of pressure that came from the government. It tended to come much more from the left than the right on these companies. And it felt very, very dangerous to go too much against that, I think.
So when you see an evolution, let's say someone like Zuckerberg, who you had a party during inauguration weekend that it felt like, I mean, I happened to be there, but JD was there, and obviously you're there, and many senators were there, and Mike Johnson was there, but Zuckerberg was there, and Sam Altman. It felt like Sachs, and it just felt like the next version of what sort of government is going to be, and this thing we seem coming together. But when you see an evolution like Zuckerberg seems to be having right now, do you think that that's more a calculated business self-preservation, or do you see that it seems to be authentic in that he's coming around, or do you even think it matters? I guess would be a better question.
I think it matters a lot. I think it's always hard to know exactly why. It's probably overdetermined. But yeah, I think there's a part of it is an Elon story where if Elon can get away with this much, maybe I can get away with a little bit less.
Yeah.
And you're sort of, what's the Viking term? You're drafting behind Elon.
Right. He's basically the rabbit and the dogs are all chasing.
You're drafting behind Elon.
Yeah.
I think, but then I think there's also, it's always, if you do a certain policy like wokeness or feminism or liberalism or socialism, and it doesn't work, this is a very ambiguous thing. And it can mean one of two things. It can mean you need to do more, or you should just maybe stop doing it altogether. And I think for a lot of Silicon Valley, for many years, there was sort of this intensification of the politics that happened in the 2010s and, went in some ways into overdrive during COVID and 2021. And it was, well, maybe we're not doing enough. We need to pay more taxes. We need to do more DEI, more wokeness. And at some point it dawns on people, it's just not working altogether. And then, you don't shift back a little bit. At that point, maybe you shift quite a lot. And I think something like that is what is happening in so many of these places. And I have a decent number of conversations with tech CEOs, and what they tell me one-on-one, and again, maybe it's very biased because they know what my perspective is, but what they tell me one-on-one is maybe they aren't fully supportive of Trump, but they are so against the political correctness and all the ways in which this has just damaged their companies. The companies don't work.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop screaming, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.